faculty colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's indeed an honor for me to be part of this institution, this program where we are taking a look at the intellectual property rights, and very happy that you have given me the opportunity to share an engineer's perspective. As was mentioned in the introduction, it's been almost 3 decades when I have had a chance to work with intellectual property, and I'd like to share with you some of the lessons and experiences along this journey. I'd like to express my thanks to Professor Raj for inviting me for this program. So in today's talk, what I would like to do is share with you a little bit of the personal journey, my understanding of the world of intellectual property, starting with the experiences or the excitement of the first patent, receiving the first patent. And then as anyone curious to see what are the parts of the patent, what does the patent actually contain, the anatomy of a patent, what is patentable, why are the claims written in a certain way, and looking at the whole aspect of it with the eyes of a person who's outside of the patent world, and therefore share with you a little bit of that journey. In entrepreneurship, you have something called the business model canvas, BMC. And whenever you are thinking of starting a company, they'll say, show us your business model canvas. And today I'd like to show you an IPR model canvas. It's sort of adapted to that. And apart from the inventors like you, people in the audience, there are 3 key players in this in the whole world of the intellectual property. One is the patent attorney, who's the one who submits the patent on your behalf, and then there's the patent examiner, and sometimes in between the patent attorney and the inventor, there's somebody called the patent engineer, and we used to have them at Ericsson, and they played a very vital role, and I'd like to share that with you. And maybe touch upon what makes a patent very valuable, of lot of business value, and the last part of my talk is, now that I am in academia for the last 17 years, I sort of see it from a different perspective. Having seen it from the competitive side, the corporate side, I now look at it and say, what should be the academic role, or what should be the way we look at patents? And that's sort of the way to close that. And Professor Raj also asked me to comment a little bit, share a little bit about the IP ecosystem at IIT Madras, and I'll be happy to do that. Now, any talk on intellectual property, I believe, must at some point touch Edison. And therefore, I will start with that right away. Because Edison was what you would call an engineer's engineer. In his lifetime, he invented so many things and filed so many valuable patents, 1,093 patents in his lifetime awarded to him. And one of the things that we remember him for, of the many things, is his light bulb. And it is said that in order to get the correct chemical composition of alloys for the filaments, so that it would glow but not burn out, and so he had tried to have different combinations. And it is said that it took him approximately 3,000 attempts to do that. And I always find it intriguing that an outsider's perspective was, Mr. Edison, you failed 2,999 times, and then the one time you hit it, it was like a jackpot, you just got it right. And his perspective was, no, it was a 2,999 step journey to the final solution. It was not a failure, it was actually on the journey. So in many ways, the patenting process or the inventive process requires us to be very persistent in our pursuit, because we believe that it will work somehow, and therefore we have to look at it that way. And it's credited to Edison that the quotation that genius or success is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Definitely, I would say that is very relevant in the context of intellectual property. And Edison was somebody who really loved and did what he loved. But the question is, will you and I, who are engineers, how much will we enjoy patents? Hopefully, at the end of this lecture, a little bit more than if you hadn't started it that way. So, in terms of the patents, I just would like to start by giving you a feel for how important is it, and what are some perspectives? Again, as an engineer, I'd like to present it to you with numbers, and numbers that sort of make us pause and think. Yes, this is really something that we cannot ignore, and this is something that we must be at least fully aware of and engage. So let's take a look at the 2018 awarded patents of the US. At the top, you find IBM with 9,100 patents in 1 year. That is US alone. And remember, this is the US Patent Office is one of the most active patent offices in terms of award of patents, but IBM operates around the world. So look at their global patent numbers, they're probably much higher. Samsung number 2, Canon number 3, Intel, LG down there. But you can see that there's really not much of a competition to IBM. And this has been this way for not 1 year, 2 years, but last 26 years. IBM has been the undisputed champion, some years even crossing 9,000 patents in one given year. So today, if you look at IBM's active patents, they have about 1,10,000 patents, which they have. And in the year 2018, if you look at their 9,100 patents, you find that 1,600 of them had something to do with artificial intelligence. That is the hot area in electrical engineering and computer science. Almost everything we do, we have deep learning and machine learning, and we have the elements of artificial intelligence. And while we are publishing our papers, IBM is filing away the patents. Now, maybe there is something that we need to pause and take a closer look. So, what is IBM focusing on right now? What we as researchers are focusing on in our research? They are looking at AI, they're looking at quantum computing. And I was told that out of IBM's 9,100 patents, about 800 of them came from IBM India. So we have every reason to feel proud about that as well. Now, when you look at this sort of a patent environment, you would expect that the one holding the most number of patents in the world is probably somebody in the United States. And many people think it's Edison because he had 1,093 patents. But since this is a talk on IPR, I thought we should look at who is the most prolific inventor in history. It is Dr. Shunpei Yamazaki of Japan. 5,378 patents. 5 times more than Edison, and he's still active in terms of publications. In 2005, he was called the most prolific inventor in history. And but his patents are slightly different compared to Edison. Edison's where a whole range of technologies were touched upon. But Mr. Yamazaki, is very strongly related to semiconductors and to computer displays. But nevertheless, has 5,378 patents to his name. Now look at IBM across the years, because they are the pace setter. They have a benchmark which is number of patents a day. 25 patents a day. This is IBM globally is generating. So prolific in terms of inventions, and keeping in mind that we're talking all along only about US patents. Then there's probably the global patents in Japan, India, in Europe, and other things. So this is a fairly active area. Now, I also would like to touch upon the financial component of it, because that sort of sets the complete picture. Because without the financial side, you would see that you say, okay, it's something where there's a lot of activity. What is it as important? So let's look at the financials. I'd like you to take a closer look. 2018, IBM earned $1.2 billion from their patents, licensing of their patents. 1.2 billion. Of numbers that we're talking about, there was one IBM patent infringement law. We're told that they have not fought infringement laws, for many years. IBM had an infringement law. Somebody was infringing upon a company called Groupon, and going through the lawsuit, they eventually managed to get a court settlement for 82.5 million. So basically, it was a violation of 4 patents, but the value of it, somebody infringing upon it, had to pay this much. Now, what did Groupon have as options when IBM went after them for patent infringement? They could have tried to show that IBM patents were invalid. Okay, that was one option. Groupon had licensed some part of IBM's technology, maybe IBM's intellectual property. Maybe they could have said, well, we actually licensed more than that. Or, somehow IBM didn't have the right to the patents in the first place. So somehow they could have, tried to do it. None of that worked. Therefore, they ended up paying the compensation. So it is said that IBM spends approximately $6 billion per year on intellectual property. And they actually get license fees from, IBM gets license fees from all the top companies, Amazon, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of them. Now, who else is in this league? And not too many companies who are at this level, but definitely Microsoft, Nokia, Ericsson, at some point or the other, have had a $1 billion plus revenue from licensing. So again, this is just to sort of set the context and maybe move on to the elements that we need to cover. So maybe just to highlight, I form a series of 10 observations. The first observation to me as an sue them, because you know that IBM has got such a large market, and therefore you would say, so a lot of it is, but there is investments going in protecting, and of course when they have such a large portfolio of intellectual property, they're also able to leverage it for revenue as well. So having said that, let me switch gears to the second point which I wanted to talk about, my first exposure to the world of patents. And I just wanted to share with you just the background which led to the filing of the first application and receiving the first patent. Now, we talked about Edison being the sort of the pioneer in patents, filing so many of them, and he was the one who started the General Electric company. He was one of them. So basically, it was a thrill for me to be my first job to be at General Electric. And so first day of work, walk in, you're received at the visitor center, and then sort of walked into the company, and then they say, well, this is the desk that Edison sat in. Edison's desk is there right at the entrance. And on the desk is a light bulb. This is actually, GE has files about 2,500 patents a year. They are also a huge IP company. And they said, oh, by the way, this person is going to be your mentor. And it turned out to be a very senior scientist. He was a Coolidge Fellow. His name was Dr. Jerome Tiemann. And he himself was somebody who had filed a lot of patents, 135 patents. And the patent for the charge coupled device, CCD, was his. And based on that one patent of his, GE would get $1 million in revenue per year. So GE had basically told Dr. Jerome Tiemann, you could do whatever you want. You could do research, you could go on a holiday, that's okay. But as long as, whatever topic you want to work on, you can work on. But he was somebody who worked very, very hard. And, I was very privileged to be his mentee. And the first thing he said was, I know you're coming from a research background, but you got to keep your eyes on patents. Those are valuable for the company. And so a very good introduction to the company and the importance of patents. And coincidentally, the year I joined was 1990. If you go back and look at the development of cellular, 1991 was when GSM was introduced. That was also the time when digital cellular was introduced. The 2G systems were introduced in the United States. So it was almost like a wide open field where if you started to work in this area, you could come up with inventive ideas, new ideas, and apply them. So that was the background, and decided to work on a problem pertaining to digital cellular, and was able to see patents. So therefore, hopefully everybody in this room will also have the same perspective. Now, what are the elements of the patent document that tells you that you are now the owner of an invention for which you have undisputed rights for the next 17 to 20 years, depending upon which country you're talking about. And so it is a very dull document. Today, students, when they look at documents, they like to see color, they like to see some animation. Patents, forget it. It's black and white. It's half the time the print is not very, very good, and you actually have to put a lot of effort into reading it. But if it's your first patent, you read it from first line to the last line. So what did it contain? It contained the date of award of the patent, And it also, of course, gives you the patent number from now on. That's a unique number that relates your invention to the patent number. And very importantly, it also tells the date on which you filed the patent, or it was finally accepted for processing by the patent office, because that becomes the priority date of your invention. If somebody else were to come and have a counter claim to that invention, the patent office would go back and say, what was your filing date or your priority date, and then decide in favor of that. Now, if you were doing the process in India, you would have something very similar. This is what a patent award document would be. It is from the Intellectual Property of India, the government agency, which gives you the patent number. Patent number, sorry, this is not very clear. The patent number is issued there, is given there. The date of issue of the patent is also given. Along with that is a covering letter, which says what is the title of the patent and the validity of the patent. 20 years from the priority date. And this is what your essentially the patent document would have. Now, let me dig a little bit deeper, because we are here to explore the world of patents, the aspects of intellectual property. So, intellectual property, or let me call it as IPR 101, course numbering schemes. We're all familiar with that in the IITs. Basically, it is a protection for the production of your mind, the inventions of your mind. So, basically, it could be in the form of a scientific invention or engineering invention, or it could be a literary or an artistic work, it could be some other aspects of creativity, but not all of them come under patents. Inventions come under patents, literary and artistic work come under copyright, and names and other designs come under trademark. All of these fall under intellectual property. What we are going to be talking about is very exclusively about patents, because that is where all the things that we have been mentioning so far and what is of interest to us is in the case of patents. Each of these three different parts, patents, copyrights and trademarks, are different branches of intellectual property. In each of these three branches, intellectual property rights stands for exclusive or monopoly right that you have as an inventor. This right is offered to you by the government of that, in our case it will be the government of India. The jurisdiction is in India, and it gives you the right to exclude others for the period in which you own the patent. You could say, this is mine, I'm not going to let anybody use it. That's one way of using it. Or you could exclude them from manufacturing or offering it for sale. Or you could license it to them, or you could transfer it, you could sell the rights, but there are several things that you could do. In many sense, it is like property that you own, that what you could do with it. Intellectual property falls into the same right. Now, patent law is a very specific area. We are in the school of patent law, so I should be careful about what I say. But basically, my understanding of patent law is that it has three parts to it. How do you establish the right? How do you, first of all, demonstrate that you have an invention? Second is, how do you create the document that records the invention? And then finally, when the patent is awarded, how will it be enforced? So these are the three elements that constitute that. Let's take a closer look at a few more pieces before we move on. The Indian Patent Law Indian Patent Act was formed in 1970. It was amended in 2016, and it dates or traces its heritage back to the British Patent Act of 1911. Now, given that our generation or your generation is called as the knowledge economy, where knowledge is value, then protecting knowledge, protecting the creative works is of extreme importance. So the whole idea of intellectual property is something that we have to take very, very carefully and then work on it in a very systematic manner. Now, in the context of patent processes, there is the patent filing step. There is the scrutinizing step where the patent office would scrutinize it, and then finally the awarding step. We'll take a closer look at that. Now, the last part from the law perspective, what is enforcement? If you find that somebody has used your invention without your permission, you have the right to file take legal action against that individual. So violation of patent right constitutes an infringement, and how will an infringement be verified? your invention has a description in which includes certain claims. What are the attributes of your invention? Now that is ultimately what defines your invention and the rights that you have. If you can show that those claims have been violated or infringed upon, then you could then take that individual to court. It would be a legal case. Now, I'm sure that at Kharagpur, you have right here within your campus the School of Intellectual Property. So you don't need to go looking for sources of information. But to non-IIT Kharagpur group, I would say there is a NPTEL course on which is specifically patent law for engineers and scientists, because we have certain ways of thinking. We find it's easier to you have to be explained in a certain way. So this is an NPTEL course. It is offered by Professor Feroz Ali Khader. He is a chair professor in intellectual property in the School of Management Studies at IIT Madras. But though he sits in the School of Management Studies, he interacts a lot with the engineering schools. So we actually derive a lot of benefit by just talking to him. Professor Khader, is this patentable? That's a very common question that he's asked. And he can sit through with you and then answer those questions. So he's an expert in intellectual property and patent law. He's a practicing advocate in the Madras High Court and has handled cases in all the way up to the Supreme Court. So again, if you would be interested, here are some things that the course would cover. It would cover the patent law. It would cover the Indian Patent Act and the rules under that. What are the different sections? What are the different rules under each of the sections? And then the amendments. So why do we need amendments? In some point of time, software was not patentable. Then at a certain point in time, certain types of software in certain contexts was patentable. So certain amendments happen in the patent law, and that is also explained. So that is in a sense IPR 101. If you now are comfortable with that, you pass the course IPR 101. You can go on to the other aspects of the patent. So the next element, which I think as an engineer we've got the basics. It's important. We've got the basics, or we've got the basic hang of it. Now, okay, tell me what a patent is all about. So here is the anatomy of a patent. There are 9 parts to a patent. And unfortunately, I didn't number it on the screen, but I'll just tell you what those are. The first part of a patent, is the background information. What is the material or the information that describes the invention? Then references, just like in a paper, we'd cite certain references. The patents cite other patents from the US or from elsewhere. They can also cite any published documents. So basically, references is a long list which has a lot of patents as other citations. Then you can see in the description, you can see the description about the inventors, who are the assignees, but more importantly, the patent examiners. Who examine the patent is usually indicated, and who is the agent or the firm that controls. That's part 3. So you can also trace the history of that. Number 4 is an abstract. Just like you would write an abstract is a short description of the invention, just like the abstract of a research paper. Number 5. Now here it's where it starts to deviate from being just like a research paper to being something completely different that we find sometimes very, very baffling. A lot of effort to describe the drawings that are associated with your invention. So patent drawings, there are 2 parts. There is a list of drawings. It's sort of maybe even surprising. After the abstract, you will see several pages of drawings. And something very interesting. I will highlight that again when we talk about drawings. Every part of the drawing will be numbered, okay, and then described later on. So basically, there is the drawing, and then there is the description of the drawings, which sort of tells you all the pieces of it. So that is the drawings become number 5. Then there is the background material, sort of the what is the context in which the invention is being developed. Then there is the summary. Background, by the way, would also have prior art, what other people have done. Then there is the summary, and then there is a detailed description of the invention. And then finally, most importantly, what is claimed. Claim 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever number of claims are. So very quickly, the 9 parts of the patent, the first few we can sort of ignore or just sort of take it for granted. Okay, we know about it. One is background information, references, who the patent examiner and the agent were, the abstract of the patent, the drawings, number 5, that's where it starts to get interesting, the background, what is the prior art, 7, what is the summary, the detailed description of the invention, including the diagrams, and then what is claimed as number 9. Okay, so let me use this patent itself as sort of the way to describe these 9 parts of the anatomy of a patent. And if you look at it, the title, basically, I'm not sure if you can read, it says Sample Timing, Selection and Frequency Offset Correction for US Digital Cellular Mobile Receivers. Okay, so maybe not all of you are communications engineers, but those of you who are communication engineers are aware that when you build a communication system and you have a receiver, you must make sure that your receiver is synchronized in timing and frequency to your transmitter. Okay. Now, how this synchronization is done depends on how you have designed the system. And it turns out that the US digital cellular system had designed it in a certain way, and it was too complex for us to implement on the digital signal processors that we had in our handsets. Okay, they were very early generation digital signal processors. So the R&D team came to the research group and said, we need to simplify this algorithm of synchronizing. And that was the first task. We designed it and we're ready to move on, but that's when we were asked to file the patent and then the rest of it. So basically it was to do with some timing and frequency synchronization, even if you're not an electrical engineer. It's a fundamental step that you would have to do the communications. It is not the communication itself. It is one step in the communication receiver process, and that is what. So we jump ahead to looking at the 4th and 5th parts of the anatomy of a patent. That is the drawings. Okay. Now, as I told you, this is what the drawing looks like. Every part is numbered so that it can be referenced. And then, of course, there is an abstract also. You can see the abstract over there. The abstract says that this is a receiver that works in a cellular environment and so on. So basically describing in a nutshell the patterns. Now, this diagram sort of caused me the first question in my mind. I said, why are you drawing the whole receiver to describe one step in the receiver process? The synchronization is sitting in one block here. One block. That's a synchronizer. Now, why do you have to draw the whole thing? Until today, I don't know the answer to that. Because that's how the invention was described and sort of presented as a patent. So that's where you start to see, well, some things are puzzling. And it gets even a little bit more puzzling before things start to clear up. So abstract and drawings, and there are several of these drawings, and then of course all in black and white and not very easy to read, and you have to trace them, saying, okay, you have number 20 here. You search in your description, you'll find, okay, there's a transmitter called 20. Then you see there's a number 120 here that has no connection to 20, but it actually turns out to be the receiver corresponding to the transmitter. So it's just numbered and then described. We just take it as a complete description of what is there in the figure. Moving on, the next very important part of it is the background. And if you notice, it talks about the prior art. That's a word that's commonly used in intellectual property to say what other people have already invented. Okay, what other people have already know. It's prior known knowledge. So basically, the background talks about the field of the invention. It also says what other methods are known, and if there are any limitations to those known methods, then you would then work on developing enhancements of that. So that is how we develop the prior art. Now, if you look through carefully and read, there is a article by Bayer and Heinrich and Wellens that happened to be the algorithm which most people were using until we came up with an alternative. So basically, the development of the patent goes in this fashion. Okay, last two slides describing the patents. There is the objects of the invention, what are we trying to solve, and then the description of the invention, the summary of these inventions. These are very, very useful fields. Now, when you pick up a patent document, leave all other things and zero in on the abstract and in the summary of the invention. If you start reading the detailed description or the description of the figures, you're lost. You'll just be reading it and get confused totally. So when you are searching for patents, look for these, because these are the indicators of what is this what you are looking for. And if you do find that this is the topic of interest, then the next thing that you should do is to read the claims. That's the last part. Part number 9 is the claims. Now, the claims are written in a very interesting manner. You can see that it will start with, it doesn't say in a big bold letters claims. No, it's just somewhere that it's embedded there. But the claims start here. What is claimed is, okay, 1. And then it goes through and describes, there's A, B, C, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is all part of the first claim. And if you actually read through this is a complete transmitter receiver. And this is part of the claim of the patent. And the first time you read it, and I said, but why did you include all this? This is not what this is not invent. What I invented is a small part, but you describe this whole thing. They said, no, but your thing is embedded in something that is part of a bigger whole. So you cannot describe it in a vacuum. You have to describe it in the whole. Okay, we agree that. Okay, so claim number 1 is what you would call as an independent claim. Now, following that, you can have multiple dependent claims. So let me just show you what a dependent claim is. The digital communication system of claim 1. Okay, using that as a reference, you claim more things. So this is a way for us to understand how the patent claims are written. There are independent claims, and then there are children, or things that are dependent on the independent claim. They are called the dependent claims. Now, where does the value of a patent come from? The combination of independent and dependent claims give you a breadth of what is invented. Remember, when you go to litigation, what they will look at is the interpretation of the claims. So, very, very important, what is the scope and what is the breadth or what you have covered in your claims. So, the value of a patent really lies in the claims, how it is written. So this is where you really have to take a step back and say, well, as an engineer, doesn't seem very logical to me. My invention, I would describe it in 2 lines, but this is a long document describing so many things, and yet, but maybe that's the way it is done. Okay, that's a very important thing to note. If in the process of examining the patent, the patent examiner says claim number 1 not allowed, what does it mean? Everything else is out of the window, because from 1 derive everything else. So if 1 is not allowed, gone. So hopefully your basic claim will stand. Maybe some dependent claims get knocked off. So observation number 4: the writing of a patent requires specialized skill and experience. So it is not something that you would recommend for every engineer to take up. It is something that I believe requires a lot of skill. You must spend time with it and understand. But is it something that we can just outsource? Here is my invention. Throw it over the wall. The patent department picks it up and then processes it. Not quite. I believe we must engage with the patent people so they understand what we actually have done with the invention. So let me switch gears a little bit and then give you a model for what we need to do as engineers in order to engage with the patent community. This is where I would like to talk very briefly about the business model canvas. Wait a minute, what did I do with this? Okay. Yes, okay, I'm sorry, I missed one part. Okay, So what are some of the challenges with the patents? The language of the patents is definitely something which we have to get used to. The description of the invention, again, not obvious, because they could talk about the said invention and the said this thing, and many such terminologies which once you get used to it, you're okay, but until then it seems a little awkward. The drawings, how to make the drawings, how to include the drawings in your description, and definitely how to put all of them together. So I talked to a lot of engineers who have filed patents, and then this is sort of what they all feel. Somewhere they feel like, hey, this claims, this is like I invented. It's as if I invented the whole of digital communications. No, I invented one small part of it. But it seems like what they are claiming. But the patent lawyer knows what he's doing, the patent examiner knows what he's doing, and exactly they understand what is being. So in some sense, the claims seem to be exaggerated in terms of it. And sometimes the attorney tells me it is deliberately done that way because you want to get as broad a claim as possible. And if it is more broad than it should be, the patent examiner will ask us to modify it. So therefore, we are okay with it. So I believe that engineers and patent attorneys speak two different languages. We are not on the same page. We are completely different frequencies. However, there is an intermediary who can come and make the change. In Ericsson, we used to call him the patent engineer. This is a patent attorney, but who is primarily an engineer by training. So an engineer trained who has passed the law and who is a practicing attorney, but who also has that engineering background, who kind of talks both languages. So a patent engineer can sit with you and work with you on understanding the patent. And then they can draft the claims, and then you come back. But in order for us to be able to even engage even with the patent engineer, we must know a little bit. The basic minimum must be known, and that is what I would like to stress upon. So before that, observation number 5, very helpful to know the basics of patents. Patent language is like a new language. C++, different programming languages. This is like a new language. There are rules, there are syntax, there's a certain structure to it, and there are some students who will go through their entire college year saying, I'm not good at C++ programming. But there are others who will say, the C++ is something I better figure out. So they sit one weekend, slog it, get the basics of it, and then move on, because they don't keep that as a perpetual weakness. I believe the latter is the better way to go. Pick up the essentials of the patent jargon, so that if you ever have to file a patent, you are at least comfortable with what's going on in terms of the language. So here comes the business model canvas. Now, if you were at IIT Madras and you said I wanted to start a company, they will ask you to go through a program called Incubate. And it is a very specific program in which you are supposed to come up with a business model canvas. There are 9 segments to a business model canvas. That's not so important. But what they will make you do is they will make you meet 100 customers. You have not even started a company, you have not built a product. You have an idea, and this is what they will ask you to do. Meet 100 customers. In week 1, they will ask you to identify what's your value proposition of your product the idea that you have. Number 2, they will ask you to identify the customers. Number 3, activities. 4, resources. Basically, by the end of 7 weeks, you will have all the 9 squares put together. And at the end of week 7, they will ask you to say, is it a go or a no-go? By that time, all entrepreneurs know, I'm not going to do this, or I am going to do this. Either they are completely convinced that this is the right product to pursue, or they are ready to throw in the towel and say, this was a harebrained idea, let me cut my losses, 7 weeks is worth it, I'll move on. Okay, now, if you have to decide whether to file a patent or not, and you have to figure out this patent language, so we'll take the business model and make it the IPR model canvas. Typically, a researcher, if you didn't have patent background, what you will do is you will spend about 6+ months trying to document the idea or the invention, and you will talk a couple of times to your institute patent attorney, and then you will give up saying, this is not going anywhere, it's a waste of time. So, but if on the other hand, if you were inspired by the Incubate model, what you would do, read 100 patents in 7 weeks. Now you say, where do I get 100 patents from? the first patent that you think is a prior art, go and look at its references, and very soon you will have not 100, you will have 500 patents to read if you want to. So basically for all of them, you would read that. Then you have to discuss it with resources. That's part of the business model. You also need to do it, and it's your subject experts who can then tell you, is this patentable or not. Then there are certain activities that you must do to reduce to practice. A patent is something that is functional. You cannot bring a non-functional thing and say, okay, this is a patent, because it has to be, there's simply reduction to practice. And then there may be partners that you identify. Just like in a business model, you need partners to develop your reduction to practice. And then eventually you come up with what you think are the essential features that are patentable. Okay? In the case of the business model, in the business case, it's a minimum value product, minimum viable product. And in this case, hopefully it's a minimum patentable proposal, or what you would like to give to the attorney. So once you have thought through this much, then you are very ready to engage with a patent agent or a patent engineer, and this, I guarantee you, will avoid what the business people call the valley of death. Somewhere in the middle, you lose steam, and then you say, okay, I give up, I'm not going to pursue this anymore. Okay, so this is the elements of that. I hope if you get a chance to look at the incubate model, and it's intense. 100 patents, 7 weeks. I'm sure you will get a good idea of what you want to do. So it's a very structured approach. Such an approach is what it will help you decide whether it's a good investment or not. And if you've done it once, you will find that you will be able to do it again and again. And it's a repeatable process, and it's a lifetime investment that you are making. Very quickly, what are the sequence of steps of a filing of a patent? As we talked about, the invention must be documented by the inventor and then handed over to the patent agent or the patent attorney. They prepare the patent application. As part of it, they will do a patent search on all prior work that has been done to see if such a similar invention has been filed by somebody else. Typically, patent lawyers, patent agents take about 2 to 3 months, because this searching process means identifying keywords from your description and then doing the search and then going, it's an iterative process. And then finally the patent is ready, you have read the claims, you have understood it, everybody is agreed, and you submit the patent office. That's when you get the priority date. Then starts the patent office part of the process. The patent examiner will pick up the application and then will do his or her own patent search, will try to identify, will raise certain queries. They will say, okay, this claim is not correct, this is invalid, or this is too broad. There's an iterative process. A lot of these answers will be given by the patent attorney. To the extent that they understand the invention, they will be able to do it, but sometimes they must come back to you to help you clarify. Please don't say, go away, I don't have time, because otherwise they'll really go away and do something which you will, you may not be happy with. So invest that time. Finally, one of 3 decisions, the patent is rejected, that means your claim 1 was knocked out, or it says, some sub-claims are knocked out, but the patent is awarded, that means it's partially given, or, as luck would have it, all your claims are intact, that means it is fully granted. So once that is done, typically the patent examining process could take anywhere from 1 to 3 years. That's why you see a large gap between the filing date and the award date. And once the patent is awarded from the priority date, you have 20 years as exclusive rights. And if you see somebody has been awarded a patent which you feel should not be given, that means prior art that would invalidate the patent, you can actually file a case in court. You can challenge awarded patent in court and thereby make it invalid. Okay, so when can an awarded patent become invalid? If it contains wrong or false information. If the invention is not novel, it is already known somewhere. Some other paper has been published in some other country, or there's a patent that existing elsewhere, or a product that exists elsewhere. Or it cannot be reduced to practice by a person skilled in the art. Now, skilled in the art, how do you define that? It is somebody who is, if it's a patent in electrical engineering and telecommunications, it's somebody who is knowledgeable in telecommunications but may not necessarily know the particular invention. So if you were to give it to that person, can that person reproduce the steps of the patent? So if it cannot be reduced to practice by a person skilled in the art, then it will become an invalid. There is a very strange rule in the US patent law, that is, if an inventor, somebody who contributed to the invention, if their name has not been included, it becomes invalid, because there is a dispute in terms of the ownership, and all patent infringement and invalidation must be done in court. Let's hope you never have to go to a patent lawsuit, because they are very cumbersome, very long drawn out, very expensive, and every once in a while they will ask you to appear in court, and a lawyer who does not know anything about patents or about engineering will question you. And it is often a frustrating and a humiliating process, and well, you can see I've gone through that once, so that's why. But it is something that well, maybe that's part of the game. So if you are considered an expert in a particular area, you may be called as an expert witness and then cross-examined by lawyers, and it's a difficult process. Let me say, let's leave it at that. So at least for engineers, the line of questioning is totally illogical. So sometimes, when somebody asks you a question, you want to give the full answer. You start to say, no, the lawyer will say, no, I didn't ask you that. Answer what you have been asked. And it's like, I was trying to explain to you so that you would understand, but he has a very clear way. He wants to say that you are contradicting yourself. So basically, they will push you into a corner, they will cross-question you, they'll kind of tie you in knots, and it's an maybe interesting experience. So, the world of patent law, let's leave it to the patent attorneys, but let's engage with it to the extent that we understand what is going on in their world. And so, it sometimes may seem a little bewildering, but if you have the basic feel for what is going on, then it's not so bad after all. So we've talked a lot about patents, we talked about the process. I would now like to take you to understand the value of a patent. It's a very simple, interesting example that I would like to share with you. Now, today is in the world of telecom, the hottest topic is 5G. Everybody is talking about 5G, and this patent actually has to do with 5G. So, in cellular technology, you have these antennas. You can see antennas all over. In 5G, they are expected to multiply by a factor of 100 or so. So, the number of antennas is going to go up. Each antenna is going to have many elements. Today we have maybe 3 elements or 4 elements on the antenna tower. It could become 64 or 128. They're talking about even larger numbers. So now what is the heart of it is that there is a central processing unit that must send information to these antennas. These are called the remote antennas or the remote radio heads. Today we have copper lines running or cables running. In the future, because we have to send large amounts of information, these are going to be replaced by optical fibers. So you heard the term backhaul, where you take information and take it to the core network. That is backhaul. This is called front haul. You take information out to the edge of the network, not to the core, but to the edge of the network. It's called front haul. Now, what does the front haul network actually have to carry? It has to carry the information that has to be transmitted by the antenna. But because it's a remote antenna, there is some additional information that the central office needs to know. It needs to know sometimes the tilt angle, whether some electronics is there all the electronics working the right way? Is there some issue with some connections, some loose connections, something is not right? There is health monitoring. Okay, so there is some additional information that needs to flow from the central unit to the antenna and back to the other side. Now, what happens is this is the lower part of it says in the optical fiber you can send different wavelengths. So you can indicate by the different colors that are there. So what is the natural way? You send whatever needs to go. That's the main information on one wavelength. And if you have any additional information, you send it on additional wavelengths. Okay, that was what was done because the sending of the main information is already standardized. Nobody wanted to mess with that. Now, whatever other information you want, you pick any other colors and then send it on those additional colors. Okay, so you would see that that's a very logical way of doing it. So here is the summary of that. Front hauling requires multiple types of information. Send the main information on one color and then send the others on the remaining colors. You could do 2, 3, but the problem comes with 5G. Now you have to send to a lot of antennas, and if you keep sending for one antenna, you send on 4 colors. Just imagine if you have to send for 256 antennas. You run out of colors, you have to start laying new fibers, and then they say, well, you know what, in 5G, front hauling is going to have a lot of very stringent requirements. Now, here comes the patent. Okay, April 2018, a patent was awarded to a French inventor. There were 2 of them, but let me call it the Chanclou patent, because he's a well-known engineer works for the telecom company called Orange. And he proposed a solution which was patented, and even if you're not a telecom engineer, you will say, oh my goodness, this is so obvious. Well, is this something that you could patent? So what was the invention? This is the prior art, right? This is the transmitter, this is the remote radio head. You send the main information on lambda 1, that's your first wavelength, and any other information you send on lambda 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you got the idea? That's what is done today. Invention. So I combine all the information using a multiplexer. Now everybody knows what a multiplexer is. You put all the information together, that becomes a multiplexer. And I will send it on lambda 1. Only one wavelength is needed because the information is already multiplexed. And at the other end, I will use a demultiplexer and take out the information and send the main information to the antenna. The rest of the information I do the whatever administrative processing I need to do. And you say, well, is this patentable? You bet. And is this valuable? You bet. Every 5G operator is going to have remote radio heads. And they can't afford to send 4 wavelengths for one antenna. They're going to actually have to, so anyone who implements front hauling in the future will have to pay royalties to this inventor, unless they find a way to invalidate this patent. So you see, this is what is called an essential patent. Okay, an essential patent. It's not a tweak on the system. It is something which you cannot avoid, using. That is the key. If you identify such opportunities, grab it, because that's worth everything. So, observation number 8, spotting an essential patent has huge monetary value. Okay, let me do a simple calculation. Okay, in any given city, like Calcutta, maybe you will have about 10,000 base stations. Each base station has 256 antennas, let us say, and you ask for a royalty of 1 rupee per day per antenna. So 1 rupee is all I'm asking for, or maybe even make it smaller. 1 rupee per day per antenna. That's 3.65 crores annually for doing nothing, or just filing the patent and holding that. So you can see that a lot of times the revenues are disproportionate when it comes to these essential patents. Okay, last part of my talk. Ultimately, we are researchers. We need to find a way to come back to the world of research. Something that we do almost without being told is the process of research, and there is a very important element that I'd like to highlight for you. In research, the most proven successful model is to first replicate. Take somebody else, whoever else around the world, the leading research group in the world, whatever they have published, you take it and replicate. Don't change anything, just replicate. Because in the process of replication, you learn a lot. And you keep asking the question, oh, why was this chosen? Why was it done like this? Why not like this? Once you have understood and replicated, then you can then say, what can I do differently? That is the innovation. Now, when you come upon the innovation, it is publishable, it's also patentable. So how do you decide? Publishable, you know how to do it. I won't have to tell you that. But for patentable, it's you ask the same questions that a patent attorney would ask. What is the problem being solved? How was it solved before? How is your solution better than the others? And is there somebody who is interested in your solution? Now, if you were to ask that for Chanclou's patent, every 5G operator is interested. Then you say, yes, file it. It's worth filing. So this is something that I believe is a model that we can follow, and we can definitely pursue that. Okay, patents, as we said in the beginning, is a process of protecting an innovative idea, maybe with the intention of getting a competitive advantage or possibly a financial gain. Now, there is a very simple metric or test for a value of a patent. If you say that mine is the best solution, the next best option may be in the public domain. How much better is your solution than the next best? If it is going to be a marginally different, then they may not bother to license your patent. They'll say, oh, no, what, we'll go with the second best. So if you have something that is substantially better than everything else around, then it becomes a valuable patent. Second, if somebody infringes on your patent, can you detect it? If it's somewhere buried inside of their product which you will never open, then really there's no point filing the patent, because you cannot detect it. Of course, if you are a big company like IBM, you may still do it, but as an individual, you may not. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to agree that patents are difficult to identify ahead of time. You cannot say, oh, this looks like a essential patent, let's go for it. And patents process is expensive, so therefore you don't want to file everything. But you then come back to answer the question, what is actually patentable? Okay, what is patentable? Anything that is novel and non-obvious. Non-obvious to who? To somebody who is skilled in the art. Okay, not obvious to some random person. Somebody who is skilled in the art. And therefore, non-obvious combinations of obvious inventions or existing inventions are patentable. So sometimes what Shanklu did, two obvious things, just put them together and then said, okay, this is my patent, but since it was not obvious to anybody else, maybe it was logical, but they just didn't bother to do it, okay, but he did it in time. Okay, so any novel idea can be patented, but not every one will be of value. IBM has 110,000 patents. Approximately 500 or so of the IBM's patents actually are active in generating revenue, which means one out of large number, maybe 1 out of 500 or 1 out of 1,000 patents are actually the ones that are that will generate revenue for you. So in the case of IBM, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of times patents are for defensive purposes. They also do something called cross-licensing. So they will go to Nokia and say, okay, you have rights to use all of my patents, I will use all of your patents without paying royalties. So something that is also something that is done. Okay, now comes the academic part of it. Very often we find that academicians and industry people are at loggerheads. Everybody is debating and arguing about IP and what is IP clause, is it exclusive rights, what do I do this and that, and then at the end of the day I look at it and say, for all this whatever, first of all, no IP may come out of this joint work. And even if it comes out, 1 in 500 patents is what is going to be of value. So it may not be the one that is of value. So don't get all tied up in knots. What we sometimes have on the academic side is we sometimes assume all innovation is happening on the side of the academia. That's not true in some technology areas. Actually, the industry is way ahead. So we have to sort of grant it that each of us have our own areas of strength. The metrics are very different in our worlds. For us, it has to be publishable, it has to be novel, and it has to be something, may not have practical value, but it should be something that is substantially more than what others have published. Industry, it's not about how much more you have added, but does it solve an existing problem? Does it give you a competitive advantage? And at the end of the day, is it definitely different from what is out there, and therefore it has potential for licensing? So, we often get into this fights, it's like, okay, should I publish or patent, or, publish and patent? So here is perspective. Only a small subset of patents will eventually generate licensing revenue. So why fight over it? Let's try to find that, let's find a common ground where it is a win-win. Whatever is a sufficient novelty can be patented. whatever is sufficient novelty can be published, and if you ask the patent attorneys, there's actually a way of doing both without jeopardizing the other. You can file what is called a provisional application very quickly, and then get the priority date, and then go ahead with preparing the patent application. In the meantime, you can publish if you want. But many times patent attorneys will also tell you, don't rush into publications. You can speed up the patent application process. Whatever you publish until you patent or submit the patent application, let it be without disclosing the details of the invention. You can show the results. You can say that I have algorithm A, it does this, it gives you this performance. You could do that. But once the patent is filed, then of course you can disclose the inventive steps as well. Okay, last part. What about the ecosystem at IIT Madras? I'm sure having a IPR, intellectual property school in your campus, it's the same here. We believe, number 10, that we can actually work as partners. We don't have to sort of constantly be at loggerheads with each other. Okay, what are some of the aspects of the ecosystem at IIT Madras? I believe continuous training. Every batch of students is given the exposure to what is IP, basic IP. Faculty, students, research scholars, everybody is given that, and faculty go through this training multiple times in their course of their career. There are tools available for databases. Training is given, specific training is given to search. You sort of type in keywords and pull out patents. And then how to write a quick disclosure format. Just one page is all it takes to file a provisional application. Work with a patent agent who can then understand your language, and then therefore there's a committee that works to quickly decide whether to file or no file, because basically once you make a decision to file, a lot of costs are involved. And of course you can make a provisional filing to get the priority date, and then make a decision to say either file or not to file, to abort the application. Okay, some of the elements of the ecosystem: a well-articulated IPR policy. Intellectual property is not guarded as a, the crown jewel. It says, okay, it can be institute owned, it can be jointly owned with the sponsor. We can give it to the sponsor completely, fully owned by the sponsor, or institute can own it and then license it to the sponsor or its nominee. We can also look at different licensing models: exclusive licensing, non-exclusive licensing, first right of refusal, so many models. And so it's basically flexibility. It's not, you don't go into the discussion saying, you know what, he's from industry, he's trying to take my intellectual property away. You don't go in with a negative suspicion, but you say, hey, let's find a way to work together and meet that. Having an IPR chair definitely helps. We have a legal cell. I'm sure you have all the legal expertise, and there's a very aggressive program of industry interaction. I'd like to highlight the research park, where we have more than 100 companies whose R&D is happening right across the wall from IIT Madras. So there's a very good interaction with them. There's also a good entrepreneurship ecosystem. So therefore, you'll find that entrepreneurs usually are the ones who are very inventive and also file a lot of patents. So let me close with a few points, just sort of to highlight what are some of the elements. Centers of excellence actually generate a lot of intellectual property, because they also work with industry, and therefore this is a snapshot of the centers of excellence in IIT Madras at this point. IIT Kharagpur probably has more than this, but they are your primary sources where IP will be generated. The research park is one more place where a lot of intellectual property gets generated. Incubation systems can of course create a lot of value intellectual property. I'd like to just point out that last year 60 of IIT Madras patents which had IIT Madras linkages came from the startup companies, incubated companies. So to summarize, I hope this journey gave you a little bit of a perspective, maybe a biased engineer's perspective, but hopefully something that helps you appreciate the nuances and the value of the other side. The value of patents hopefully is very, very clear. The anatomy of your patent, what we have to work with, the claims, the drawings, the abstracts, hopefully those also sort of fall into place. If you ever have to work with IPR, remember the IPR model canvas. Don't drag it out for months. Put in an intense effort, get what you need, and then move on. understanding what is patentable. Don't say it's obvious, so I'm not going to file a patent. You just have to take a step back and think, is this something that is substantially different from others, and therefore something that still is worth, and we are at a stage, all the IITs are at a stage where industry, academia, startups are all in our ecosystem. So therefore, we must find a way to work together, and I believe a collaborative approach where industry and academia collaborate, where engineers and patent attorneys cooperate, and I think there's a lot of collaborations that will bring us to a win-win situation. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for being a very good audience. If you have a few questions, I'll be happy to take it. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Professor Raj for the, yes.
That quick draft that we can make, can you describe what?
I will leave the slides with
for the first application of the patent.
Oh, yes,
quick draft.
Provisional finding.
Yeah,
one page. One page
look
answers
like?
those 4 questions.
Okay.
What is the problem being solved? How was it solved before? How is your solution different? And who would be interested in this invention? Just answer
That
those
you
4
offer
questions.
to the our
Attorney, along with some information about what you actually have invented. So that 1 page may be good enough for you to sort of make a quick judgment. Should you file a patent or not? The attorney may ask you for a little bit more details. 1 paragraph may not be enough for them. They may ask you for a few drawings, but in a sense, it's like 1 or 2 pages is what it takes to do the initial filing.
And if you file in India, then it is covered all over.
No. I'm glad you asked the question. Patents are a regional right. If you file a patent with the government of India, then only the jurisdiction under the government of India will be covered by that. So what it covers is, if you want a patent, another person cannot buy, sell, make, import, nothing. Anything that has that inventive process is forbidden in India, but they can do it in Sri Lanka, they can do it anywhere else. So that is why a lot of times, once you find out that this is a valuable patent, you would file in other countries as well. But it's an expensive process. But what you would do is, you would say, like, for example, Shanklu, he detected that it's a 5G patent, it's a valuable patent. He'll say, which are the large 5G markets? China, India, USA. So you have to file those 3 immediately. So it is a regional right. You have to file it locally to get that. Unfortunately, there is nothing that sort of gives you blanket rights all over the world.
So, but once I file it in one region, other people can't file it.
No. Well, it will become, once it's published, then it will become prior art, and they cannot file. But they can use the invention.
They can use it, but they can't file.
But see, a lot of times they would, let's say somebody in China wants to use your invention and you have not filed a patent in China. So the whole Chinese market will benefit from your invention if you do not have a patent in China. Yeah.
And how much does it cost?
Well, I think you have experts in the audience who will be able to answer that question. Maybe how much does it cost to file a patent in India?
Around 1.5 lakhs.
1.5 lakhs, that's the initial filing.
Filing to 10 years.
Oh, for the life of the patent, because there are some registration fees and some maintenance costs that you have to pay periodically. So it's not cheap.
You can get in touch with the IPR office. They will
Yeah.
give you
So it's of the order of 1.5 lakhs. I think in the US they would say it's about $30,000, but maybe the numbers are changed. But it's a little bit more expensive in other countries.
So what is the period from filing to publishing?
Well, once you file, you can publish. No problem. Your patent invention is protected.
Means we'll come to know our patent can be means published. Means yes or no? Only
No. I think you're talking about patents being granted, right?
Granted,
From
yes.
the time that you submit your application, it could be anywhere from 1 year to 3 years before the patent office decides. See, if everything is clear and the patent examiner agrees with the claims, it will happen in a few months. But if the patent examiner says, hey, your claim 1 is not okay, then it will go multiple iterations in order to get there.
and one more thing, sir. Let's take a journal publication.
Yeah.
We have few authors, and first author will be given that more credit. So similarly in this patents, so if there are more than one person, so how it?
Again, I'll have to defer it to the intellectual property experts here, but I assume that if you are an inventor and your name is there, you have equal rights to it. There's no like first name is, but usually the most highest contributor's name comes first. But I don't think in terms of rights, you all are equal owners of the intellectual property. Yes, sir.
There was a time when we had when publication was encouraged all across the academia.
Yes.
And then we had a problem of number versus quality, because the reward system was tuned to quality, rather the numbers. Do we see a similar situation in the patent environment now that the ranking systems are looking for the number of patents filed? Do we?
By the academia?
Yeah,
I'm afraid of that. I'm really afraid of that, because
so it may turn out to be a race for filing as many patents regardless of.
And it may cause us to fight with our industry friends. We should not do that, because you're right, absolutely right. I coming from industry and now sitting on the academia side, I see that there's so much benefit to cooperate rather than fight with each other, saying, well, if I work with you, you may steal my intellectual property. The intellectual property has not even been generated. Why are we fighting about it now? So I think we sort of agree to resolve Intellectual Property Act at a later point, and I think sort of move on. I think the bigger benefit is from cooperation. And definitely my opinion would be is not to give too much emphasis or rank universities based on the number of patents, but see if they have got a system patent or essential patent, then give them credit for it, because that is huge, because that would bring in a lot of revenue to the university. So that I would definitely, you can look at revenues from patents. I suppose that would be a good metric rather than numbers.
But that is not the case now. This number is considered for this ranking.
Yes. The ARIAA ranking, yes. Okay.
Just one
Yes,
quick
sir.
question.
Yes.
You have been working in industry and then you came to academia. Now looking at the way the best business is to find out who is infringing into your patent.
Correct.
So do you find a career prospect for individuals to look for where somebody has infringed into the XYZ company's patents so that they can make more money out of it?
There are actually companies in the US whose job seems to be, looking for, they don't go after any infringer. They look for the IBMs and the Ericssons and the Nokias, because if you go after these guys, you are likely to win more in that. And I'm told that there are patent attorneys, again, I'll stand corrected if it's not, but that who are sometimes willing to fight your case without fees until you win. So basically, they're also taking the risk. So there are people who are going after, they file a patent and then are looking for, but I think as good technologists, that would not be good, I definitely would not recommend that. But if you suspect infringement, don't hesitate to go after them, because I think that the legal system will support. But it's a long drawn out battle. Yeah.
So how long do you get the patent license for you? Is it different with different fields?
No. It's 20 years from the priority date is what, is that correct?
I think you can come to Saturday, there's an IPR workshop.
Yes, that's a good way to advertise.
This Saturday, we have IPR workshop from 9:45. At the end of the lecture, we'll show the slide. You can register and come here. And we are famous patent attorneys coming. So you can clear all your doubt. And we have a DTG students. IPR cell is here. You feel free to come and we'll clear all the fundamental doubts. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best.